Welcome to the History and Heritage podcast with me, Liam Blake. Join me as we uncover hidden stories and insights that shaped our world. From mysteries to legacies, join us on this journey through time.
The goat is the poor man's cow. You'll find that phrase everywhere in old Irish farming talk, in journals, in oral histories, and in the sideways smirk of a neighbour describing his grandfather's yard. But nowhere does it ring truer than with the old Irish goat, a hardy, shaggy, charismatic creature that browsed its way into Irish life over 5,000 years ago, only to vanish, almost, before most of us even noticed it was gone. This episode is the story of that goat. How it came here, what it gave us, why it mattered, and how, against all odds, it was pulled back from the brink by a handful of volunteers with DNA kits, 19th-century paintings, and pure Irish determination. Let's wind the clock right back, all the way to the Neolithic period. That's the era when farming first reaches Ireland. About 5 millennia ago, a forested island sparsely settled with humans just beginning to carve out fields, plant cereals, build cairns and tombs, and, crucially, bring livestock across the sea. Cattle, sheep, pigs, chickens probably, and goats. Now, unlike many later livestock, these early goats weren't being imported to fill a stud book or win rosettes. They were here to survive. And that they did. On Atlantic rainfall, thin upland pasture, gorse and heather, winter wind and patchwork fields. Over thousands of years, these animals became a land race, a population shaped not by breed society's standards, but by pure selection. You survived or you didn't. And what survived was the old Irish goat. If you've never seen one, imagine this. Small but solid, with short upright ears, great ridged horns sweeping backwards, a long outer coat for rain, and a soft undercoat for warmth. Every one of them bearded, every one of them scruffy in the most dignified way. And the colours. Black and tan, badger-faced, Swiss-marked, mottled greys, so distinctive that conservationists today can recognise the heritage lines just by sight, even before checking the DNA. And for most of Irish history, this was the goat. There was no other. If a cottage had a goat, and most did, it was one of these. No Anglo-Nubians, no Saanans, no imported stock from Swiss valleys or English farms. Just your native, no-nonsense milker. As I said, the poor man's cow. This was an animal that gave milk to families who could never afford to graze a cow. It provided meat, fat, hides for leather, and parchment. Its horn was turned into spoons, handles, and tools. Its milk was ideal for children, rich, digestible, close to human milk in composition. It fed people through famines and bitter winters, and, crucially, it would eat just about anything. Gorse, ivy, briars, docks, and even thistles. If it could be chewed, it was on the menu. It's one thing to survive hardship. It is another entirely to be woven so deeply into a culture that you end up in the very fabric of its language and its landscape. The Irish goat left its hoof prints all over our place names. Derra na Gower, known as Derry na Gowley in County Westmeath, means the oak grove of the goats. Ballygowan, found in several counties, comes from Ballion na Gower, the town of the goats. And Carrig na Gower, County Waterford, comes from Corrig na Gower, meaning the rock of the goats. Even the town of Goran, County Kilkenny, probably comes from the Irish Gaureen, meaning little goat. These aren't modern labels slapped on for tourism. They're medieval, or maybe even earlier. Place memory passed down in names long after the goats themselves had vanished over the next hill. Then there's Kilorglin, County Kerry. Every August, they hoist a live wild billy goat into a cage and crown him King Puck for 3 days, overlooking the oldest continuously run fair in Ireland. Some say the fair has pagan roots. Others point to an old story about a goat who warned townspeople of approaching Cromwellian soldiers. One theory claims a legal loophole in 1808 said goats weren't covered by tolls, so people traded them to keep the market going. Whatever the story, what matters is that the goat was placed, literally, at the centre of the celebration. It was a symbol of plenty, of survival, and of mischief. But goats weren't just mascots. They were economics. By the late 19th century, goat numbers in Ireland peaked at over 280,000, down to 250,000 by 1908. This wasn't in hobby farms, this was serious trade. In spring, drovers took whole herds to ports and shipped them to England and Scotland. They arrived as harbingers of spring, fresh milk in cities where cows were impractical. Dublin loved kid meat. In South Dublin, kids were even raised on sheep milk or bottled cow's milk to meet demand. And by kids I mean baby goats, not children. These animals had a role, a purpose, in both domestic and international economies, and then, almost overnight, the tide turned. Around 1900, the first so-called improved breeds began to arrive. Toggenburgs, Sannins, and the Anglo-Nubians. They were bigger, sleeker, and hornless. They produced more milk, but only under carefully managed high-input conditions. Still, they became the darlings of breed societies, Department of Agriculture officials, and shoring judges. The old Irish goat, shaggy and stubborn, fell out of favour. One observer described it as vermin on the hills. Not only did numbers collapse, but its memory, its reputation, and even its existence began to vanish. By 1980, only about 9,000 goats of any kind were recorded in Ireland. The old Irish goat was declared extinct in domestication. Feral pockets survived just in places like the Burren, the Wicklow Mountains, and the western seaboard. But they were hunted, culled, rounded up for meat, or crossbred out of recognition. Even major international reference works, including Mason's World Dictionary of Livestock Breeds, listed it as extinct. It had effectively slipped into ghosthood, and that would have been that, a vanishing and a quiet erasing. Except, in Mulrenny, County Mayo, someone looked up at a hillside and said, "Hang on a minute. The goats there weren't just feral. They looked familiar, remarkably familiar. Like the goats in the 19th century paintings. Long coats, big horns, upright ears, a dozen heritage colour patterns. A local sanctuary was established, and volunteers formed the Old Irish Goat Society. And they did something crucial. They didn't just stop at appearances. They went straight for the DNA. Partnering with Trinity College Dublin, with Professor Hans Lenstra in Utrecht, and with Weatherby's DNA labs, they collected genetic samples from the Mulrenny goats. Then they compared them with museum specimens, stuffed old Irish goats preserved in the 1800s. In 2017, a research team led by Cassidy published the first full mitochondrial DNA survey of Irish goats. The results were astounding. The Mulrenny goats matched genetically with the historic landrace. It was like finding the last verse of a forgotten song. From there, the revival snowballed. The society built a managed herd, now around 80 individuals, with known parentage and tight control of inbreeding. In 2021, they opened the Old Irish Goat Centre in Mulrenny, a public-facing sanctuary where you can meet the animals and learn their story. And then, finally, in 2022, after decades of obscurity, the Department of Agriculture formally recognised the Old Irish Goat as a native at-risk breed. Minister Charlie McConalogue made the announcement, and for the first time in living memory, the goat was back on the record. And it's not just about heritage. These goats are good at their job. They are resilient, hardy, incomparable browsers. They'll eat what tractors can't reach and chemicals can't kill. In Howth, County Dublin, a herd of old Irish goats was deployed to reduce gorse build-up, the kind that had caused repeated wildfires. They did the work for free, quietly, effectively, and they looked like folklore while doing it. In the Burren, goats are part of a centuries-old grazing regime that keeps biodiversity high by stopping encroachment. They are living tools, sustainable native zero-emission brush cleaners. But still, threats remain. Feral herds get culled indiscriminately, genetic dilution continues, and the effective breeding population remains narrow. And the goat, unlike say the Connemara pony, is still mostly absent from national identity. We remember the horses, the red setter, the giant deer, the sheep, but the goat is just starting to nibble its way back into the story. And yet, what a story. Neolithic arrival, parchment for monks, milk for children, war experts, place names, a coronation every August, then extinction, then resurrection, by science and passion and good, old, stubborn fieldwork. And now, in our era of climate change, biodiversity collapse and food insecurity, it turns out that this animal, the poor man's cow, might just be part of the future too. So, next time you're in Howth or Mulranny, or wandering a place called Carrignagower, and you spot a shaggy billy goat munching ivy like it invented the plant, tip your cap. You're looking at a survivor, a native, and maybe the scruffiest, most beautiful piece of Irish history still standing.